Hello, everyone. As some of you probably know, I've been pretty obsessed with the topic of aesthetics, imagination, etc. in Avodas Hashem, and I wanted to continue this journey and expand it and share it by talking about Rav Kook and his contribution to this, and hopefully that will be a springboard for other ideas. So, the first thing we're reading is from Oros, Yisrael Utchiyaso, about the revival of Klal Yisrael and many of its aspects, or all of its aspects. And Rav Kook is going to give us a perspective on our place in our spiritual history, and also the world's history and the world's culture, and how that transitions from where we are now to ultimately Mashiach, and why this is all part of the plan. So he says that the entire modern culture is founded on the imagination and on the experience and aesthetics, the senses. And essentially that the more the imagination becomes actualized and focused on, the more the world becomes preoccupied with that part of ourselves, the more the seichel leaves, the more the intellectual aspect is degraded. Because he says the whole world thinks that its osher, its fulfillment, its happiness, relies on developing and actualizing the koach hamadama. And as that progresses, as we become more imaginative, more aesthetic, and less intellectual, so even scientists, even philosophers, intellectuals are also affected. And that even in the secular world, the wisdom and the seichel that was there before is being replaced by artists and actors and speakers, etc. And as the Gemara says or the Mishnah says in Sota, the time before Mashiach, chutzpah yaske, there will be more chutzpah, more brazenness, impulsiveness, disrespect, and chachma will be disregarded, yiras chet will be disliked, emes will be missing, pnei hador k'pnei hakelev, and we have a very negative picture of what the generation before Mashiach is like in terms of its boldness and its disregard for objectivity. And Rav Kook is, I don't know, machadesh, but his insight here is that the adinus hapnimis, the inner gentleness, or you could say sensitivity, the nuance of pnimius, of seeing things deeply, that comes from a sense of wisdom, a sense of chachma, is also melting away because of this. And not to be giving a musar shmuz here, but we do see in the modern world that people understand morality has become degraded and more relativistic than it ever was before. And at the same time, it's also becoming a much more experiential, much more consumerist kind of world. One would think that the more we become sensitive to beauty, the more we're sensitive to other people and to what's right and wrong. But at the moment, that's not the case. And we can attribute that to the lack of connection between the imagination and the seichel, as we're going to see soon. Interestingly, Rav Kook also says here that another thing that becomes rare in our time is the she'ifa, the desire for ruchnias, the desire for transcendence, for dveikus, for true connection to, and for pure morality also. And for illustrating, understanding concepts for themselves and for their absolute forms. That also becomes a chazon yakar, a distant vision. And what's happening in the world, Rav Kook says, is also happening in a microcosm in Klal Yisrael, in terms of Ruach HaKodesh, in terms of loving the Torah for its essence, that also is something we are affected by as a people. We've become less internal and less sensitive also. We've become less attached in an intrinsic way to the essence of what we believe in, because there's a detachment from objectivity in general and a focus only on the experience. But all of this, Rav Kook says, Omnam, kol zehu yisod eitza merachok, atzas Hashem hu lahashlim es koach hamadame. All of this is a pretext, all of this is Hashem's plan to refine and complete the imagination. And essentially, that in order for Ruach HaKodesh to come about, in order for Hashem to mashpia on us, either nevuah or something like that, there has to be a completed medium for that to be filtered through. It has to be a kli for that hashpah. And the koach hamadame, the imagination, the aesthetic sense, is the base, is the throne, is the medium through which that nevuah will take place and that Ruach HaKodesh will come. So a few interesting things from this. Number one, in terms of what he says about scientists and philosophers, I definitely think we're a less philosophical generation. And in science too, there's a book called Lost in Math. A theoretical physicist named Sabine Hossenfelder, I think. She talks about how physicists nowadays are so obsessed with the elegance of the math and how much the theory will make sense to them and not need to resort to a universe of fine-tuning and, improbabilities. They're so obsessed with finding that perceived beauty that they have in their theories that they've started to just not pay attention to gathering more data and to finding theories that will actually explain things better and be less complicated, rather than just imagining what seems to them to be more interesting or sensible. So much so that she calls it an aesthetic tendency that physicists have nowadays. But also in terms of how this will introduce us to Rav Kook's whole perspective and to, I think, the perspective that we need, is that the imagination is a basis for Ruach HaKodesh. So, the Rambam says in Mor Nevuchim, and maybe even in Mishnah Torah, that the Navi, as part of being a Navi, he processes what Hashem brings through his seichel, through the ideas and the concepts. He filters that through his own imagination, his own personality, and his own sense of things. Which is why every Navi has his own style, as Chazal say. Besides Moshe Rabbeinu, who didn't need his imaginative faculty, didn't need his associative courtesies to put the ideas together with a metaphor of some kind. He just said the truth as it was. But all other Nevi'im, including the Avos, had a koach hamadame and had to use that in order to translate to themselves and to other people what the nevuah is. The Rambam says that someone who only develops their intellect becomes a chacham, becomes a smart person, intellectual, and someone who only develops his koach hamadame, his dimyon, his imagination, becomes, to the other extreme, purely spiritualistic, purely experiential, becomes a cult, fanatic, etc. And someone who is able to develop his imagination and connect that with their seichel, and both of those are developed properly and connected properly, and the seichel is what brings its ideas through the koach hadimyon. That is what allows someone to become a navi. So that's just a fascinating concept in itself. You'd think of a Navi as just someone who sits there and the Nevuah comes, but the Rambam emphasizes that's not how it works. The person has to prepare for that, has to be complete and perfected in all different aspects of themselves. And what Rav Kook is telling us is that the time we live in is so aesthetic that sometimes objectivity is thrown out. Often objectivity is just thrown out. And we do live in a world that's morally corrupt. But at the same time, all of this serves to form the kli that will eventually be the body, the medium, the vessel through which the seichel, ultimately those same truths, those objective truths, will be expressed. And I find this encouraging. I think it's a great way to form for ourselves a perspective on where our subjectivity lies in this, where our own sense of things, our aesthetic sense of things, our enjoyment of life even, is involved in this. And Rav Kook is so nuanced. He doesn't say, go ahead with your imagination. Rav Kook was such an aesthetic, experiential person, as you can see in his diaries, as you can see in his writing, in just the fact that all of his writing is poetry. And yet he says, the seichel is of course the higher value, and without it, the world is going in a bad direction, but all of this serves as a pretext for ultimately integrating everything. And I think that is the nuance that we need here. So I hope you enjoyed. I hope to continue Mirz Hashem with the next paragraph and other readings. And always feel free to give me feedback. I may mention something in a later shir, or just add in my own ideas more in the future. But have a wonderful day, and hopefully we'll find better lighting.